Hi, I'm Jock.
Hey, I'm Ray.
You're listening to The Pig Wrestlers, a podcast where Ray and I are reviewing this book, Never Wrestle With A Pig by Mark McCormack. So what is the topic for today? Are we going to do some more books?
The thing I wanted to talk about is I buzzed a friend who has done really well over the last year investing in things like Tesla. And I said, is this a buying opportunity? And he goes, in my opinion, it's still too expensive. And that bugged me. And there's a reason why it bugged me, because I started trading when I was in school, right? So I was like 16, 17. Mm-hmm. And I understood nothing. And you know, only understand a little bit more now. But if you look at all of our pensions in the UK, they're invested in the UK stock market, which is dominated by oil and gas and mining. Mm-hmm. And like, it's so the old world. They were the biggest stocks in the world for the last 100 years, but they've been completely displaced. And my feeling is still that Amazon and Tesla are going to be the biggest companies in the world by some margin. And so Amazon we've spoken about because they've got this invented in this high standards, and they've just understood that this culture is what gets it done. And they've proven that in many segments. But if you think that the stock market has been dominated by what is basically raw energy, so oil, gas, and mining, they are on the cusp of being displaced by a single organization headed by a singly minded person in Elon Musk. And let me just paint a picture for you here. So we in the UK were a few years ago trying to get private companies to build a power station here that was going to supply electricity to the UK, a nuclear power station, at double today's rate for the cost of energy. It was sheer bonkers. Theresa May was PM at the time. She was trying to get it through. I thought it was nonsense. I'm glad it fell apart, because I think the future of energy generation and energy storage rather than transmission is going to be local. And so if you look at what happened in Africa with M-Pesa, right, it completely skipped over the centralized banking system, which was useless anyway over there. But it was the future. Like, they got to the future before anybody else because they didn't have this legacy stuff to fool around with. Like, you know, we talked about the US and still writing rent checks because ACH is complete junk. But what if Tesla, plus obviously Solar City, is the future for Africa? You know, these batteries in these cars can power your home for a number of days. So if you've got solar panels everywhere, because solar panels are now getting cheaper and cheaper, and people just plug in and charge at, you know, pennies. And in Africa, it's going to be even cheaper because you've got a lot of sun. There's no more digging up the roads for power lines. There's no more centralized power companies that are rife with corruption. There's no more government controlling local communities. Even South Africa, with its rolling power cuts because Eskom just can't get its act together. Like, this could be transformative. Like, the future is, for me, energy, right? That's what powers our, you know, mod cons, right? Everything from charging up our phones to lighting and whatever else. But if you couldn't rely on power, like they can't in Africa, but suddenly one or two people start getting electric cars in your local community and some solar panels go up, before long, people will switch away from the old, staid, whatever. And this will be the future of energy generation and storage. And there won't be any transmission loss, so it'll be much more efficient. There won't be building big power stations, so much more efficient.
I think yes, but with a couple of refinements. Because you've actually got an interesting case study of that kind of scenario. But I think the refinement I would say is that local generation, but in combination with a reduced footprint of national infrastructure as well. So if you look at the Australian model, I think they hit the milestone of more than 50% of the nation's electricity generation was done locally by consumers with solar panels on the home. And from what I understand, at least, there's a lot more take up of battery banks, power banks at homes to store excess solar energy, either for use themselves or for selling back to the grid. And it is not uncommon for people with solar panels on the battery bank to be able to break even, if not make a profit, on their energy generation. And as you say, a Tesla or another electric vehicle is essentially just a battery bank with wheels on it that you could use whilst it's still at house to provide that storage. So yeah, you're avoiding the transmission loss, you're avoiding the problems with infrastructure. But the reason why I say I think it needs to be a hybrid of the two rather than purely local generation is look at the example of Texas in a big winter snap. So unexpected cold, none of the homes necessarily prepared or insulated for that kind of weather because it's just extraordinary. The infrastructure, which is essentially specific to Texas and it has very few links with the wider national grid infrastructure. So Texas is effectively isolated as a state in terms of power generation. And what happened was, not unsurprisingly, their infrastructure within the state broke down because it just wasn't tested for those kind of conditions. And whilst they said, we did kind of try and make it more winter-proof or more cold-proof, you can't really test it until you get the same conditions or worse again. So there's some mitigating circumstances as well. But the problem is that when you've got this purely localized model, if it goes down, you're screwed because you've got no fallback at all. Now, in the African situation, I think if you had a grid of, as you say, localized pockets of local power generation, but these pockets to be interlinked, then I think you'd have a much more resilient network rather than just the massive hub and spokes model that you have with traditional power generation. I think you still need that interconnectedness rather than every individual town or village or state being self-contained.
All I'm saying is if you have the optionality, and if it's as simple as you have a battery-powered car, then you can power whatever you need off of that. And I think that's why Tesla is going to be the biggest company in the world, because it's not just a car company, it's the future of energy.
There's a lot of change that's being driven in effect through the reputation of Tesla, but they're by no means the first company to provide this kind of flexible power generation. So PodPoint, a UK-based company that provides domestic and business electric vehicle charging points, has always had this kind of concept of either being able to give power back to the grid by essentially just lowering the rate or turning off the charging of vehicles periodically when needed. So you've already kind of got that infrastructure happening as well.
I just think it's overcomplicated. If you just simplify it to, taking the M-Pesa example, you have a phone. That phone is now basically your access to money. You have a car. That is now how you power everything. It just fundamentally changes the paradigm. You don't need to put in more infrastructure if you don't want to. And actually, if this does contribute to how you power your home or your business, that massively takes away demand from the existing industries, devalues them quite substantially. And I think people underestimate, they're looking at Tesla as a car company. And while I don't own any Tesla stock, I'm jealous of all those people who did buy at the beginning of last year, because it just seems obvious to me. It's the future. Let the Model Y come out. We won't have two cars anymore, one run around and one family. And that'll be good enough. We've got the office at home now. It's not like I'm going to need two cars in the household.
One of the reasons why I think Tesla has both been successful and why it's created a rod for its own back is I saw the Volkswagen ID3 on the road, and it's basically passing the baton from their Golf model to the ID3, which is effectively same size replacement but electric. And it's not particularly interesting as a car. It's not particularly showy. It's got good range, it charges quickly, it ticks the boxes, and it's nice and middle of the road. It is otherwise unremarkable, except for the fact it happens to be an electric vehicle. And that is the indication, because now that's probably going to become the car to beat because it's so middle of the road. Tesla, don't get me wrong, is on the leading edge, but the Model 3, definitely the Model S, are on the higher tier, particularly when you start getting the add-ons. The Y will be interesting to see when it actually hits the UK, what effect it has and how popular it is to take up.
I find it absurd that everyone's driving cars in the UK.
But they're still very popular.
Because the form factor is popular.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, Volkswagen is going to have a whole range of cars built on the same platform. And so they're going to be following up with an SUV pretty quickly. When you look at it, car for car, if Tesla doesn't ramp up the manufacturing, they'll be outnumbered by these nondescript Volkswagens.
Can Volkswagen do the over-the-air updates? Can they do the next generation of batteries like Tesla announced a few months ago with their battery day? I just think they're like the best part of a decade behind, and you just don't catch up. They'll spend money. They'll spend inordinate amounts of money. But there's only so far their balance sheet can really take them. The Audi e-tron, right? Anybody who owns it doesn't like traveling because they've got huge range anxiety. And if you look at all the tests, Tesla's battery technology is the thing. That's what they've been talking about all these years. It is about the battery, building the gigafactories. And the fact is, not only do they have their factories in the US, but they've got their massive factory in China online now. And this year they'll have their one in Germany.
So I agree, battery technology is the key thing. I think all of the non-Tesla EVs up until this point have had old generation technology, but particularly with this ID3, it's on newer battery tech, which is comparable and competitive with range on the Tesla 3. So I think you've got a much more interesting challenge hotting up, because you're now getting real competitors on a like-for-like basis on the same criteria that consumers are probably most bothered about. Namely range, longevity, speed of charging. We're still in the mindset of it takes like 5 minutes to fill your car with petrol. People are expecting a similar idiom for their electric vehicle, even though that's not necessarily the case. And the technology required to allow a battery to be charged rapidly without basically destroying it in the process or over a period of recharges is actually surprisingly tricky, because it's almost exactly the opposite of what you need in a car with range, to have a battery that also supports fast charging.
I mean, that for me is the misnomer behind Tesla, right? I think it's more than just producing cars, right? Look, when the iPhone came out, it's now formed new habits, right? We're staring at our screens all day long because it does everything for us. Yeah. I think that's what is going to happen, especially in places like Africa, where, you know, if we own a car, it sits there the vast majority of the time. Well, it's now got a major use case as a mobile battery pack.
So I think yes, but I don't think Tesla is there to be that car yet. I think China, I was reading they've launched basically a £3,500, so maybe about $5,000 car. It's small, it's boxy, it's not going to break any speed records, it's probably not going to have a huge amount of range, but it's a battery on wheels and it's a tenth of the cost of a Tesla.
And I give you Apple versus Android, iOS versus Android.
Yeah, but you're talking Africa here.
Vast majority of the profits, even though Android dominates in terms of share of phones.
If we're looking at price point, and given that there's no mobile telecom providers to subsidize the cost of the hardware, like you have with the iPhone, I think in the case of cars, it's going to be a different economic model. I think Tesla's not going to win in Africa simply because they're out of the price range to get ubiquity.
Yeah, but you also got to look at profits. You know, there's a reason why, you know, you sort of get champion challenger type scenarios. Apple not only pioneered, but it's stayed ahead, especially in brand terms. And that's allowed them to maintain a very substantial premium, very substantial lead in, should I go with Android when Apple is, all encompassing?
I think Tesla's weak point is its manufacturing. They haven't got the scale yet. They haven't got the quality when they're under pressure. By their own admission, the wheels come off, figuratively speaking, when they start ramping up the production and they're getting things off the production line too quickly.
But Jock, these are solvable problems.
They are, but the thing is, China's solving them more quickly.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to be the factor that's going to determine who owns the future.
I think at this point in time, now that the floodgates have been opened and EVs are becoming much more widely available than before, they're becoming much more socially acceptable than before, I think now it's a case of who can produce the most quantity of good enough vehicles at an appropriate price point. And Tesla just isn't there. Tesla's not going to get the volume. It may try and keep that Apple premium, and retain kind of the upper section of the market.
First ship up to Mars, no one's going to buy anything but Tesla. Right? There's just more to this story that captivates the world. The guy just needs to tweet and I'm sure sales go up.
So I genuinely think, and I'm willing to be proven wrong, unless Tesla can fix its manufacturing output, so they've proven they can do it, they've proven they can meet their targets, they need to double, they need to be exponential in the number of cars they're churning out at a decent level of quality from this point onwards to meet the challenge of these competitors, these challengers that are springing up at scale already.
People don't make decisions rationally like that, Jock. The Chinese love iPhones. They love Nike shoes. You can buy shoes for nothing in China. They're producing them in ridiculous quantities. They still want their, overinflated pair of Nikes.
So there's prestige buys, I get that.
And the mass totally aspire towards it.
We'll see. I think China's going to make or break Tesla in the next 2 or 3 years.
No, Tesla's won. As far as I'm concerned, I can't see anybody catching up with them. The funny thing about all of this, Ford and Audi and all of these companies spent probably trillions figuring out how to work with aluminium. And these arrogant sods gone, yeah, forget aluminium. We put rockets into space using steel. We're just going to use steel. Cheaper, more durable, less fiddly to work with. They just have a better culture for thinking about this stuff. And if you're years behind and it takes you years to figure out what the path is going forward, it was only a few years ago where people were saying Tesla, they're not going to hit their numbers. It's going to go bankrupt. They're profitable. They're in is it the S&P 500? They're in the S&P 500, so every big fund tracker has to buy them. Mm-hmm. They've done what everybody said they could not do. And I think this is what it comes down to. You wouldn't bet against them.
I think that Tesla in the next 5 to 10 years needs to crack manufacturing to fend off competitors.
I'll borrow to take that bet. Easy. I'll borrow from Robin Hood to take that bet.
Nice. And your bet is localized power generation based around the electric vehicle?
I think that Tesla is the future of energy. Not just electric vehicles and solar is the future of energy, with maybe a little bit of local nuclear. But I think Tesla is going to win the substantial part of the profits that come in the energy game.
You're listening to the Pig Wrestlers podcast. We're meant to be reviewing the book Never Wrestle With A Pig by Mark McCormack, but we don't always get around to it.